My father was a school teacher. My mother was a housewife. I was born really at the moment when the grandparents made the move from the pushcart to the store and from the Lower East Side to Brooklyn. Really, I grew up on Eastern Parkway and around Crown Heights. Went to PS 161, I believe it was. The area that I grew up in was Jewish middle class mostly. You know, like my parents and grandparents, they were doctors, they were some businessmen, lawyers, teachers, and it was all white, and a lot Jewish. My father, I think, had wanted to be a writer. And when he graduated, he worked his way through college to Columbia, holding, like a lot of them, 2, 3 jobs at the same time. And he was offered a job by William Fox, who was one of the early movie pioneers, 20th Century Fox, and he wanted to take it, but he was the eldest child and the son of immigrant family, 6 or 7 kids, and they were very poor, and he had to get a job that paid something and had some security, and that was teaching then. You didn't need a further degree at that time, so he became a school teacher. I grew up with the silent movies, really. I'd been to the movies a lot by the time sound came along. But I loved it. I loved movies. I loved going there and waiting outside the box office until an adult came along, and you'd ask them to take you in because they didn't take kids by themselves. I think it wasn't until much later, until I was in high school probably, that I made any kind of connection to what was up on the screen and what people did to put it up there. I wanted to be in movies in some way, but I didn't think of it as, well, somebody wrote it, and I started writing very early in school. But if you wanted to be a serious writer, you became a novelist or a poet or a playwright. Not movies. I mean, movies were Hollywood, and Hollywood was somewhere that you went and sold out for a lot of money. My dramatic writing was devoted more to playwriting than movie writing. I didn't do any serious writing till college, and then I wrote a couple of short stories that the New Yorker took, and that was a big thing then. I remember the first story they paid me $50 for, and then a couple of weeks later I got another check for them for $30 more, saying they hadn't paid me enough. So it was $80 that I got for the story, and I thought of myself then as that kind of writer. I would write short stories and one-act plays I had written. And then when I graduated, I got a job rewriting a play for a Broadway producer, and he paid me $15 a week to do it. And I lived on that. I got a room on 52nd Street for $8 a week, and I could live for $1 a day. I could eat well in those days. And I rewrote this play, and it went on, failed. But that was really what I was thinking of, that kind of writing.
Who was the producer?
Producer was a man, I think, a man named Joseph Hyman. He was a producer. He was the business manager of Moss Hart and a producer or co-producer stuff he did.
You've mentored so many screenwriters, and I know you've had a lot of mentors yourself, I think. And I think one of them maybe was Moss Hart, right?
It was, well, I met him the summer I was 13 at a summer adult camp where his family had a bungalow and we had a bungalow right next door. My parents became friends with his parents and I with him, and he was just terribly nice to me, extremely nice, and he was a lovely man.
Where was he at that point with
He
Kaufman?
had just, that's summer, he had his first hit, Once in a Lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And
About the movie business.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and but you know, I would go to rehearsals of his plays, and as a matter of fact, the story I sold to the New Yorker was through him. That is, I'd written this story in college, my junior year. I didn't know what to do with it, and I sent it to Morse for criticism, really, not for anything else. And he sent it along to Harold Ross, who ran the New Yorker.
Well, you went to Dartmouth, right?
I went to Dartmouth.
Mm-hmm.
And
What was your major?
English, what else? Really, English, drama, whatever, you know.
Now, was Schulberg there then?
Bud had just graduated,
Mm-hmm.
but he came back that freshman year. He was writing What Makes Sammy Run. And I met him then, and he was very nice to me. He kind of mentored me a bit. I became the editor of the magazine, the humor magazine. The Jack-O-Lantern it was called, you know. And I liked it there. I liked it very much. There were a few teachers who were meaningful. A couple of art professors and a French professor. And I felt it a good experience. I was on the fencing team. I traveled around. And after I graduated, as I said, I got that $15 a week for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got drafted quite early in February of '41. I started writing reporters at large while I was in the Army for the New Yorker. I wrote what was probably the first soldier show, really, a musical comedy. There was some writer who was a composer, some soldier who was a composer, another couple who were dancers, and I wrote this show, and it was going to be a pretty big thing. The Brooks Atkinson, who was, I think, the Times drama critic, was coming down, and John O'Hara,
Wow.
who was the drama critic for Newsweek, I believe. He was coming down, and
But he was publishing in the New Yorker too then, right?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But they were going to come down, and it was a big thing, and we were due to open on December 10th. And December 7th,
Wow.
we're in rehearsal when this somebody was listening to music on the radio. Then that stopped, and people were talking. And I was outside. And they called me in to listen to this news, you know, which is Pearl Harbor. And it seemed very far away, you know, because I remember we got the news. One of the actors, typically, you know, said, "This means we're not going to get the critics." and of course we did open finally several weeks later, but nobody came down, and it wasn't a big thing by then.
When was This Is the Army? That must have been...
Well, I was one of the dancers, had been in a show that Morse Hart wrote called Lady in the Dark.
Gertrude Lawrence.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and Danny Kaye. It was his
Tchaikovsky.
big thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very sweet, very nice dancer, and he one of his boyfriends was the son of a Army general, and they got him, Eddie, my friend, up to This Is the Army, which was, they were just putting together, the dancer. And he got me up. And I went up to write publicity, basically, for them. And I had a little room in a Quonset hut right next to Irving Berlin. And he would pop into my office every once in a while to ask me what I thought of a lyric or something like that. It was a formality for him in some way. He wasn't going to listen to anything I or anybody else said, basically, but he did. And again, he was very nice, very, very nice to me. And I wrote a piece, a reporter at large for the New Yorker, on actors in the Army, on the rehearsals for This Is the Army. And they liked the piece, and they were going to print it, and I had to, as a formality, send it up to my superiors in the Army for clearance. And some regular Army colonel decided it was bad news for the Army. It was making fun of the Army and should not be printed. I ran to Harold Ross. I had known a little bit by that time, and he loved it. He loved to fight, and particularly with the Army. And he had been on the Stars and Stripes in World War I. He called General Marshall. He got permission from he said he was going to run the piece anyway. And I said, you run the piece, I'm going to end up in the Aleutians or something. You know, they're going to... And he said, nah, fuck them out, you know, the Army. And he ran the piece, and before there could be any repercussions, the Army started an Army magazine called Yank. It used to be a weekly. And the head of it was Colonel, domestic life, a publisher who'd been on the Stars and Stripes with Ross. So Ross called him about me, and I got transferred over to Yank, and that was where I stayed for the next 3 years or whatever it was. Yank decided they wanted a correspondent in Moscow, and they were going to send me. And but being the Army, they couldn't cut me orders that said you're to go to Moscow and do this. They cut me orders that said, I still remember them, because I was to proceed to Tehran, what was then Persia, and such other places as are necessary for your mission. I was on the boat for 42 days. It was a Dutch freighter that used to make the run from Rotterdam to Java. It took a few passengers. There were some Mexicans who were going to Russia to form the legation there. There were a couple of Army engineers, me, and we went from New York to Philadelphia, through the canal to Australia, and then on up to the Persian Gulf.
Wow.
42 days. He went crazy. And I reported, I was supposed to report it to the military attaché in Tehran and say, my orders, I'm supposed to go to Russia. And he just laughed. He said, you're not going to Russia. Nobody goes to Russia, you know, from here. The Russians don't want you, you know. And you want to write something, just stay here and write about the Army here. And so I was stuck there for about 6 weeks. It was quite miserable. It was very hot. And there was nothing to do, really. It was mainly service personnel. They sending Lend-Lease stuff up to Russia. And finally I got a call saying there was to be NBC was doing a radio program around the world, different Yank correspondents. It was the 1 year anniversary, and I was to go to Jerusalem and make the broadcast from there. That was great. I had these orders and that said I was to go, so this was my mission. So I flew, I remember very hungover, to Jerusalem and made the broadcast, and then I never went back. I kind of followed the war. North Africa and Sicily and Italy. And then I would go back to Cairo periodically because I got per diem in Cairo and nowhere else. I was there in Cairo when there was a press conference given by two officers, the partisans of Yugoslavia. They were led by Tito. And this was the first time anybody knew anything about them or what they were doing. And I thought that was a great story. They were under the guardianship of the British. And the British and the Allies in general didn't want any news about Tito to come out before the Second Front, the invasion, which was going to happen in June. This was now March or April, but they didn't know how to deal with Tito, who was a communist. And they were giving him guns and stuff because he was the only one fighting the Germans, but they were very leery about touting him anymore. I found out where they were staying, and which was a secret. They weren't supposed to, but I found some British sergeant who was a driver for them and got him drunk, and he told me, and I wrote them a letter and in which I made it very plain that I was also of a leftist persuasion, you know, and therefore to be trusted by them. And I got an immediate response from them saying, come. And I went to see them. They were two of them. They were there for brain operations. They'd both been wounded. And one of them didn't speak any English, but the other one was fluent in English, a man named Dedier. They said, yes, we want as much publicity as possible, you know, and why don't you come to our country and you can meet Tito. And I said, great. They hid me. I took off my uniform and they gave me some clothes and they ferried me over to an island in the Adriatic, which was a little bit of a staging point. There was going to be a youth congress in Yugoslavia somewhere. The Germans held the cities and the towns, the bigger towns, and the partisans held the interior, the land. So we had a few firefights with German troops, but finally got to this mountain fastness where Tito was, and I got to interview him a couple of times, and I was going up to the front where there was fighting there, and one night I was heading there and I ran into a British officer, major. I had put on my uniform again, and he stopped and he said, well, who are you? You know, what are you doing here? You know, and I told him. He said, oh, I remember he said, most irregular. He said, most irregular, you better come with me. And he took me up to this house where Randolph Churchill was. He was one of the people there. And I told him my story, and he got a big kick out of it. He thought that was very funny, but then he was very impressed by the New Yorker and stuff like that. He said, but, you know, stay here, and you're under arrest, basically. And they flew me out and with Churchill one night, and flew me back to Bari, where there was a very nice British captain waiting for me, and he was saying, "We're taking charge of you because we don't want to see you terrorized by the Americans." And they flew me back to Algiers, where their American headquarters was, and I got interviewed by some general. And I really thought I was going to be court-martialed because they were very upset, because I had sent stories out to Yank, not to the New Yorker or any place, that Yank had printed about the partisans. And meanwhile, they had designated an American and a British correspondent from the pool there and given them parachute training and all, just to delay them. They were going to then let them in. And I got there first. And, you know, but this general, he said, "Well, we'll see what we want to do with you." And then this piece came out, really. And that helped me, that they weren't going to court-martial me after that. What they did, though, was to hold up my piece, my pieces about Tito. Because what I'd sent back was mostly stuff from that island I was on. I hadn't written up the Tito interview yet. These correspondents were flown in, and I think the day after I left, the Germans dropped a couple of battalions of paratroopers on there, and Tito just got away. I got out in the late spring of 46, 5. I went to the New Yorker, who did what, I don't know whether they still do anything like that. They gave me a drawing account of $100 a week. And I was to write whatever, reporters at large or something like that. And I was kind of paralyzed. I didn't know who I was. I had no experience of civilian life, really. And so mainly I just sat in the office they gave me, or I went off to the movies and didn't do much. But then I had a book published, which was a collection of the New Yorker war pieces and the Yugoslav piece. And it was received quite well. And on the basis, really, of the book, I got an agent and a Hollywood agent and a job offer to go out and work for 10 weeks with a writer, producer, director named Robert Rossen. And I was to work on a Chekhov story called The Grasshopper, I believe it was called. Anyway, I went out there for 10 weeks, and I stayed 6 months. I did the 10 weeks with Rossen, really working with him on a movie called All the King's Men, rather than the Chekhov thing. He was writing the script for that.
Was this at Columbia or
that was at Columbia?
Yeah, you were at Columbia. So you were there when Harry Cohn.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, at one point, Rossen wanted his desk moved from one place in his office to another. So he had one end and I had the other, and we were moving it around. When I saw this man, stocky, bald-headed man, standing in the doorway, and I remember what he said to Rossen. He said, "Rossen," he pointed to me, he said, "Who is this, one of your commie writers from New York?" And Rossen said, "Yes." And Cohn didn't care, at all. He said, "Yeah, all right, but you're putting the desk in the wrong place. Go put it over there." It was interesting, given what was going to come, that he knew Rossen was a communist, or certainly very left. It didn't matter to him as long as he did the work and he did what Cohn wanted him to do. At that point, there was no other pressure on Cohn to do anything. So I did the 10 weeks.
Is it fair to say that you learned how to put a script together with Rawson?
I learned a lot from Rawson.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been there for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, working at Warner's most of the time, you know, and he knew the nuts and bolts for it. But he was talented. You know, he was a strange man, and I just kind of sat at his feet, you know. But I remember the things that I learned about writing movies. There was one scene he gave me to write, and I brought it back to him. It took about 2 pages, and I was very pleased with it. The dialogue was very good and whatever. You know, and he read it. He said, "Fine, it's nice writing," and he said, "Let me take it and see what I can do with it," you know. And he took it away, and it turned out in the movies to be all a reaction shot that said everything that those 2 pages had said, really, you know. And it was a very key point. It was the point where you were beginning to doubt who this Huey Long character really was. But he said, "You don't need the 2 page, you know." And I liked them. I felt very happy with it. But I did learn from him. And then my 10 weeks was up, and he said he would keep me on. I was getting $250 a week. But my agent had become a producer with another of his clients, Burt Lancaster. And there was a movie they were doing, a script they wanted. He offered me $500 a week. So I went to Ross and I said, "I got to take this. It's twice what I'm getting with you." And he said, "Fine, goodbye, good luck." And they thought, the agent, his name was Harold Hecht, thought I was inexperienced. They would put me together with an experienced writer. And they did, a very talented writer named Ben Maddow. And I learned a lot from him. We wrote a kind of a pseudo-Hitchcockian kind of melodrama.
With one of the world's great titles.
Yeah.
What was it called?
Kiss the Blood Off Your Hands, or My Hands, Kiss the Blood Off My Hands. And on the base of our script, they got Joan Fontaine, who was a big star there, and set it up. And of course, immediately hired another writer to rewrite our script, which they did, and the picture was done. It was not terribly good. But I spent, as I said, I was several months there, and I loved it. You know, I liked working at the studio. I liked the whole seeing what made a movie. I became friends with a very talented editor who then became a director named Robert Parrish. He had grown up with the grips and the gaffers and the rest of that, and took me around. And I was seeing the movies from a whole other point of view, seeing it as an industry, seeing it as, you know, these technicians and what they did and how they did it and who they were. And I loved it. I loved the whole experience. I was learning something. The whole business of being in the movies was great. I didn't have a car originally in Lancaster, who was shooting a movie at Universal, where this was, in the Valley. I think he was shooting All My Sons, the Arthur Miller play. He would pick me up and drive me in. And I liked he was very anxious to learn. anything. He would ask me about what music to listen to, what books, and I learned from him also, really, from an actor's point of view, because when he would talk in the script meetings we had, even if I disagreed with him and didn't like him, there was usually something in what he saw. And as I said, I'd gone away for 10 weeks, stayed for 6 months, and the marriage was failing anyway. And I went back, and the marriage did break up, and live television was starting then. And I started working there, writing these shows for no money. There was no money, and I know that I worked for one show called Charlie Wilde, Private Eye, and the whole show was done for $5,000, of which the packager took $1,500, and the rest was split up between the actors and the writer. But it was fun doing. Again, it was something was starting up, and nobody knew what the hell it was. It wasn't movies, it wasn't plays. It was some kind of form in between there, and it was live, so that once you started, you couldn't stop. There was no such thing as saying, "Okay, cut and let's shoot this take again." You had to go when you went. So it was kind of Wild Westish. Well, the writing differed because it was, you were limited in your scope. It's interesting because they talk a lot about the golden age of television. When Patty was wearing Rod Serling and Reggie Rose and Vidal and the rest of that. And it was very good stuff, but one of the reasons, the big reasons, was that the limitations forced you to write about character. You couldn't write about big action sequences or even small action sequences. You were stuck with people in a room, or that gradually expanded as they got more, to the point where I could write a show which took place on a skyscraper that was being built. As I said, character, I wrote for a show called the Somerset Maugham thing, which is stuff more or less based on a lot of his stories. And then I hooked up with a show, this would have been 1949 by then, or 1950, called Danger, which was a CBS half-hour show, melodrama show. Director was Yul Brynner, and the producer was a close friend of mine named Martin Ritt. And Yul's assistant was Sidney Lumet. And Marty's assistant was an ex-actor named Charles Russell. And that was very nice, to work for. We adapted, a fair number of short stories, but otherwise it was, you had, 25 minutes, to do this show, but it was quite successful. And then Yul left to do this musical, which he had no hopes for and thought it was a mistake, but they were offering him a lot of money. And so he would go and do it. And then Marty left to direct more stuff. And Charles Russell took Marty's place, and Sidney took Yul's place. We did I think probably the first remote show there. We did it at the circus, and Anne Bancroft was in it. Under her name was Anne Marno then. And the climax of the show was the villain got too close to the tiger cage, and the tiger had clawed him to death. And Sidney had set the thing up very well. So you shot the villain getting closer. Then he shot the tiger, and off camera was a tiger's trainer with a big rod, and which he goosed the tiger with, and the tiger went like that, and Sidney cut from that, and it worked perfect. It really looked like the tiger was going after him, and we did the show, and it worked great until the end, and it was like the tiger had been waiting. It was the climactic moment when the trainer went like that, the tiger just kind of sat there. And meanwhile, he had to go to the guy staggering back with blood dripping from him. And that was the kind of thing, you know, I mean, Sidney, who was very imaginative, one of the problems of doing live television was that it was all, the cameras were all on cables, which were all over the floor. And, you know, if you wanted to follow a character, it would hit the cable and go up and like that. And then Sidney thought of stringing them from the ceiling, which helped. You were creating, you know, some bastard, you know, form of drama, really, you know, and I did that very happily until I got blacklisted.
Right.
And I'd been working, I brought a script in to Charlie Russell, the producer, and he said, I can't use you anymore, or I'm not supposed to use you anymore. Got orders from above. You're on some kind of list. And I said, oh, you know, I knew pretty much what it was. And he said, yeah, but, you know, pick another name and we'll do it with a pseudonym. And Sidney knew about it. We told Sidney. And, you know, Charlie was totally non-political. Sidney was more left, more liberal. He was not a communist by any means. But they would have lost their jobs. They would have been blacklisted if it had been known they were doing this. At the same time, my then agent came and said he had a job for me. And I said, great. And in those days, the advertising agencies did the pilots, or what they call audition scripts. And he said, I have a script like that for you to do for Young and Rubicam, the advertising things. And I said, great, fine. He said, I got you good money. It was probably $200 or something like that. And I wrote the script. I forget whether it was an adaptation or what the hell it was. But anyway, I wrote it, gave it to him. He said, fine. And then he called me and said, the producer at Young and Rubicam wants to see you. He has some notes on the script. And, oh, I'm leaving out one of the things. When I gave him the script by the agent to bring to them, he said, put another name on it. I said, why? And he said, well, you know, things are happening and it's safer to put another name on it. So I had cooked up this name with Russell, so I put that name on it and forgot about it. So then he called and said, the producer wants to see the writer. He's got some notes from him. And I said, I can't go in there. There are people up at Young and Rubicam who know me as me, you know, and I can't go in as this other person. I can't do it. Tell him to give me the notes, and I'll, you know, I'll incorporate them and send it back. He called back and says, no, he insists on seeing the writer. You know, so I said, I'm sorry, I can't go up. And he got mad at me. Then he called back and he said, I fixed it. And I said, great, how you fix it? He said, I fired the writer as being uncooperative, and I got him another writer to do the changes. I said, great, who'd you get? He said, you. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I told him Walter Bernstein was coming up to do the... I said, why couldn't you have done that in the first place? He said, no, never mind that. You go up and see him as you. So I did. And I had to listen while he told me what a shit the other writer had been. and he would never use them again. And gave me the notes, which I did. I brought it back, and he thanked me. And he said he should have gotten you in the first place because you're a much better writer than this other fella. That's how crazy it was, really, you know. But anyway, I wrote under the pseudonym until Russell came and said you can't use the pseudonym because they know that writers are very shifty characters, and they're probably writing under different names. And you have to find somebody who can go in and into script conferences and meet with the executives. So that began the whole, you know, another 10 years or 8 years of finding fronts, of getting people who, you know, who would put their name on your scripts. And that was tough. It was hard to do that, and they never lasted. Most of them were very well-meaning. Some of them wanted it because they wanted the credits and to have a career as television writers. Some people wouldn't take money for it because they felt the whole thing was wrong and they just wanted to help out. Some people took the money and wanted it. So it was tough, but it you know, it was harder for the directors and the actors. They had to show their face, you know. If I got a front who worked, who, you know, was able to handle the process, I didn't have to, you know, show up or anything. And I spent, I think, close to 5 years in working for Lumet and Russell, because after they did Danger, they went on to do a movie called a series called You Are There.
For CBS.
For CBS. And I went to work for that and brought in 2 friends of mine who were blacklisted writers also. And the 3 of us did that show for several years. And it was very successful. You took an event in history, say the death of Socrates or the discovery of America. There would be reporters. The CBS reporters would be off screen. You didn't see them. They would ask questions of Columbus, of Joan of Arc, of one of the inquisitors. You would try to recreate that moment. You do the Trojan horse, really, and what you would try to find, what made the show successful, I think, is you tried to find the conflict in that situation, that there were 2 sides, more or less equally matched. That gave it the drama, basically. So we didn't really try to stack the deck, even though, you know, we were a bunch of leftos. But I mean, history did it for us, you know. And Joan of Arc, I did, and we broke it up. I did a lot of the Civil War stuff, the death of Stonewall Jackson. I remember I did. And the show was extremely successful. It won awards. The only complaint I know was from the wife of the man who owned one of the beer companies, Miller, I think it was, who wrote in very indignantly that we had not been fair to Marie Antoinette. I remember that. But it was...
And it was the real CBS News correspondents. I mean, it was Walter Cronkite.
Oh, yes, it was Cronkite that began and ended the show. Don...
Hollenbeck? Don Hollenbeck?
I think it was Hollenbeck. They were the top CBS reporters who... but it was, you know, it's interesting when I look back on that period. It was bad. In every way. I mean, the atmosphere was bad. The fear that people had. The people who lost their jobs, lost their careers. But at the same time, there was a kind of goodness and camaraderie among the people who were blacklisted. We helped each other, when we could. And if there was a job open somewhere and say I was busy and these other two friends were also busy, we would give it, even using our names, we would give it to some blacklisted writer who needed it. And there was a kind of generosity of spirit that was very valuable to me, was very important to me, and that I miss now. Anyway, I did television. Till 1958, when I got a call from Lumet, who had gone on to doing features, and there was a movie he was doing with Sophia Loren, and they needed they needed a full rewrite. I mean, the script they had, he had just thrown out. He wanted from the beginning, and I said, great. And the producers were Carlo Ponti, Sophia's husband, and another Italian producer, also very fluent in English and very, very sophisticated. And I met them, and I was fine as far as they were concerned. And I started writing the script under my own name. Really, and
this was the beginning of the end of the blacklist for you.
The blacklist was beginning to crack. I think Dalton Trumbo had been hired. It was still working, but it showed signs of ending. And I started writing the script, and I got a call from my agent saying, "There's a subpoena out for you from the House Un-American Committee." It's interesting, it came from the agent. It didn't, I said, "How do you know?" He said, "Paramount told me." And I said, "Thank you very much." And I packed a bag and I went on the lam. I went up to Little Compton, Rhode Island, where somebody loaned me a wonderful little shack on the water. And I finished the script. They never served me with the subpoena. The committee held its hearings in New York. It was the last hearings they did hold. And I finished the script, and the agent had negotiated a deal with Ponti at Paramount for me to work for them. And the agent called and said, "Paramount's not going through with the deal because you didn't testify." I said, "Well, they never served me, And he said, "Well, they won't do it." And I said, "Oh, sorry." I figured, I'm back on the blacklist now. But then
why do you think it took them so long to catch up with you? I mean, it was almost 10 years since the first.
Well, I didn't. I wasn't that big a fish, and I had not been active in so many things that they, I think, they had their list, and they went down it, and I was penciled in, or for the New York.
They didn't go alphabetically.
No, but there was one, because I would get a visit from the FBI.
Right, because that happened a lot. Right?
Yeah, two guys would come, and it was always the same thing. They were very polite. We'd like to talk to you. I'd say, "I'm sorry, I got nothing to say, goodbye." But they would stop you getting on a bus or coming out of the subway, all very polite, but it was letting you know they knew who you were. It was scary, you know, really. And but anyway, after a while, that stopped, and they just did it over the phone. And there was one guy in particular who did it, and you know, Wally, I think it was Graubard, something like that. He'd call up and he'd say, "Hey, it's Wally." I say, "Hey, Wally, how are you? How are the kids?" How are they? He said, "Fine." You know, he said, "You know, you ready to talk?" And I said, "No." He said, "Okay, bye." I had the feeling he's sitting at a desk with going down this list. But anyway, I got a call again from some executive at Paramount saying, would I meet with the head of Paramount to talk about this? I said, sure. And I went in to see, it was a man named Frank Freeman at the time. Very courtly Southern gentleman. Very nice.
But very right-wing, as I recall.
Oh, very to the right of John Wayne. I mean, he was really there. And he spent the beginning telling me about, there had been a very nasty strike in the, I think, 46 or something like that, of technicians and below the line people. And he said they were picketing out there. He said, I could have gone out and solved the whole thing. They were my boys talking to them. He said, but Russian-looking men kept interfering. I mean, he was on that level of sophistication. You know, he had a dossier on me on his desk that went back to college. He had every political thing that I had done, every place I had lived, and when I had lived there, the whole thing. He said, do you mind if we go down this list and you tell me whether it's true or not and how you feel about it? I said, fine. But you know, at that point I felt, fuck it, I had survived the thing. There wasn't much more they could do to me that they hadn't done, and I had survived it, and I would again if it happened. And it went down. It was, you know, like this is your life. You know, there were some things I said. They were all true, by the way. You know, there was some things I said. Yes, I would do this again. That's the way I feel. A couple of things I said, no, I wouldn't do it again. You know, and I just leveled with him. Didn't seem to be any reason not to. And we finished the end. He said, okay, thank you. You've been very cooperative. I'm going to take this up with someone I talked to about these things, who's the man named O'Neill, who's the head of the American Legion. I'll get back to you. I said, great, thank you. And they called 2 weeks later and said, okay, you can go to work. And that, I still couldn't work in television for another couple of years, really. But movies, I wasn't interested in television at that point. I was just interested in movies. I've directed twice. Mm-hmm. I directed the fourth remake of a Shirley Temple movie called Little Miss Marker.
Which is a Damon Runyon story, right?
Damon Runyon story. And Walter Matthau was playing the lead. I then cast Julie Andrews because I thought that would make a very interesting relationship with a lot of conflict. Turned out it didn't. That there was zero chemistry between them, and I think they didn't even really like each other particularly. Although Julie was very, very nice.
I've worked with her too. She's lovely.
She was just great,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And Tony Curtis was in it, and he was in his drug phase there, you know. And one time I had done a scene, a fairly long scene, we had a lot to say, and he couldn't remember his lines at all. And at one point he said, excuse me. He went off, he went back to his trailer, inhaled a few things, came back very sprightly, and he knew all of his lines, but not in their proper order. You know, then it took a while for him to come back to that. It was not a happy experience for me. I was, I had waited, I think, too long to direct. So I took something which was not my kind of thing, really, to do. It, as my friend Martin Ritt said to me, it should be either somebody 22 years old or somebody who's done 70 movies. Really, that kind of thing. It's not, well, I was going to say it's not terrible. It probably is terrible, but it's mild. You know, it's mild. I was going through a divorce at the time. I had my kids with me. It was not a good time. It was not a happy experience. And the picture, of course, was not successful. Then I did this half-hour thing for HBO for a series of theirs called Women and Men. And that was different. It was from a short story by Irwin Shaw. It was material that I knew, and the two actors were lovely, you know. And that was a happy experience. That was very nice. And
how have you gotten along with directors as a rule?
well, I've been lucky in the directors I've worked with. Arthur Penn, Sidney Lumet, Michael Ritchie, Martin Ritt. They were all directors that I had a personal relationship with. And they were all directors who wanted the writer around. I would get a call from Marty or from Michael saying the scene isn't working, you have to do some work on it. He would call the writer. You know, so they, as I say, I didn't have the excuse of saying, "Oh no, that's not me up on the screen." What was up there was me, good or bad or whatever it was. I had no excuses for pinning it on. Well, that's not true. There were a couple of, one or two movies where I felt that the director screwed it up. I was, on the whole, lucky in the directors that I worked with.
Same thing with actors?
I didn't have anything to do with the actors, really, you know. And so...
I was thinking about your relationship with Lancaster back at the...
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, I liked him. You know, then I didn't see him for a long time. And I was in Paris with Arthur Penn working on a movie called The Train.
Right.
World War II movie that Arthur was going to direct, that Burt was playing the lead in. And they fired Arthur after one day shooting. I thought it was grossly unfair. It was, during the period I was writing, Lancaster came over, remembered our relationship, was very nice. He had a son who was crippled, or partially crippled. He had a limp. Very sweet, very nice. He wrote Bad News Bears.
Oh, yeah.
Afterward. But he was younger then. He was adolescent, and I would take him out to lunch. We were working at a studio, and one time he came to, I invited him, he said, "I can't go." I said, "Why not?" He said, "My father said I can't go with you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're paying all the time and I can't go." And I found that very strange in Burt. But anyway, he was responsible for firing Arthur. The scene he had shot, the one day's shooting, was a scene between Burt and a very good French actor named Michel Simon, who was in it. And I watched the shooting, and it was a very emotional scene for Burt, a relatively emotional scene. And he wouldn't do what Arthur wanted him to do, you know. And at one point, I'll never forget this, he turned to Arthur and said, "Listen, here, I'll give it the grin," you know. And I think Arthur was pushing him into an area he didn't want to go. His last couple of movies had not been terribly successful. And I think he was worried he was going to get an art house movie that also would not be commercially successful. Because I got a call at 11 that night from Bert saying they were letting Arthur go. And John Frankenheimer was coming over to take his place. And he said, John's a bit of a whore, but he'll do what I want him to do. So he was already turning into this golem, you know, they did the movie, and the movie was a good movie. And I left. He said, would you stay and finish? And I said, no.
And you had worked on Magnificent Seven, too, right? Or
well, yeah, I wrote the first draft of a totally different movie. I mean, mine was much closer to the original in who the characters were and the kind of characters they were. And there was really nothing of mine left in what was done. I didn't deserve a credit or any. And when I did it, Ewell was going to direct it.
Interesting.
And he would have been a good director, you know, and he was going to direct it, and then Tyrone Power died. He was shooting one of those biblical things, and they offered Ewell a great deal of money to take his place. And that was the end of his directing, really. You know, he went and did that, and John Sturges wrote, I don't know whether Ewell, well, he acted in it. He wasn't going to act in it originally. He was just going to direct it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get involved with Something's Gotta Give? How did that happen? Which was supposed to be a Marilyn Monroe picture, and she died.
Well, I had written a movie a day ahead of shooting called Heller in Pink Tights, which was a very stylish Western directed by George Cukor.
Right. With Sophia Loren.
With Sophia Loren, Tony Quinn playing a part that Jack Lemmon or James Garner should have played. Really, he was totally miscast. And there had been a treatment written by very good writer, Dudley Nichols. But he was dying. He was sick, and then he finally couldn't do it. So they called me in at the last minute, because I had worked for Ponte before. And it was a great experience, because you couldn't lose. I mean, you were writing, if you brought something in that was possible to shoot, you were a hero. So if it wasn't so good, well, you had the excuse you were writing it under the gun and had no time. It was just, it's a strange, very, as I said, very stylish movie, and I kind of like it. But anyway, I adored Cukor. I just and then afterward, I was in Vienna doing another movie for Sophia, based on a Molnar play. And it was one of those situations where I was writing the script, and Ponte, or his partner, Jerosi, would come in and say, you have to write in a part for a Swedish actor. And I'd say, you know, this is taking place in Habsburg, Vienna in 1809. How does a Swedish actor get? And he says, never mind. If we put a Swedish actor in, we get 600,000 krona or whatever it is. It was that kind of movie. It was terrible. I couldn't wait to get out. I took my name off it, actually, when it was finally done. But anyway, Cukor came over to replace a director who had died on a movie about Franz Liszt, called A Day Without End or something like that. And he found out I was there, and he called me. He said, would you read the script? It needs work. So I read the script, and I said, the only advice I have is to fire, don't touch the script, but fire Dirk Bogarde and get Sid Caesar. Really, I mean, it was one of those self-parodying, scripts. It was terrible. It was, oh, the list boy is here. The list boy is here. It was that kind of thing. And he said, would you come and do some work on it? And I said, oh no, there's nothing can be done in the time you have before you start shooting. Anyway, I had just started going seriously with a lady who I was to meet in Paris, and I said, no, I can't do it, He said, just 2 weeks. Just give me 2 weeks, we can do some big things. I said, no, I can't. I went to Paris, and the producer came in. There was an American producer who was an agent named Charlie Feldman. And one of the reasons he was doing this movie was that his mistress, an French actress named, not concubine, but
Capucine.
Capucine.
Capucine, yes.
Mm-hmm. She was in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Cukor sent Feldman to get me. And I'd never been, before or since, in that position of being courted in that way. Every night, wherever it was, the restaurant, and always
Trou d'Argent or someplace like that.
And always just do this, because I have such a job waiting for you after this, a trip of yourself, And what's fascinating about it, I don't know how other people react, but 99% of you is laughing at it. But there's that tiny little 1% thing, well, listen, why not? Maybe, And I finally said, okay, I'll go, but just 2 weeks. I'll just go for 2 weeks. And I went back to Vienna, and Cukor and I sat down, and I said, well, let's start with what you're going to shoot. We could change it. And it was a scene between Liszt and Wagner, I believe. And he said, well, I said, I'll rewrite this script, this scene, and then we'll go on. So I went back and I rewrote the scene. I brought it to him, and he said, it's not right. I said, I know it's not right, but it's better, isn't it? He said, yeah, it's better, but it's not right. I worked on that one scene for most of those 2 weeks. He would not let it go until he felt it was in this dog of a movie. I think there's this one good scene. But anyway, I liked him enormously. And when he was on the Marilyn Monroe thing, they were looking for a writer to, do the script, and he called me and said, "Are you free? Can you do this?" And I did, and that was an experience. I remember I came onto the set my first day, and Marilyn was there, and she was behaving very well. She was very ebullient and happy about the part, and I was standing, when she left, I was standing next to the first AD who'd worked with her on other pictures, and he said, "She's not coming back tomorrow." I said, "What are you talking about? Didn't you see how she is? She's supposed." She said, "No." He said, "I know her. It won't." Sure enough, she didn't come back, and it was, she just was that combination of that stars often of victim killer. She was saying, "Please, I don't want this power. Please take it away from me. And if you try, I'm going to kill you with it." And I had a couple of script meetings with her at her house, and she's very shrewd about her own character. She talked about her in the third person, like, Marilyn Monroe wouldn't do this. This is wrong, And she knew what she could do. And I wrote a few scenes, and Dean Martin was there, was just walking around with a golf club, and it blew up. I mean, it came where they fired her, you know, finally, because they couldn't. She'd come in, she wouldn't come in. She, you know, she didn't look good. She wasn't supposed to leave Los Angeles. She flew to Madison Square Garden for a Kennedy rally. Or
Was that the Happy Birthday
I
rally?
think so. Yeah, yeah.
So when did you hear that she was dead?
I didn't believe she killed herself.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt that, but I felt that she got drunk. She took pills she wasn't supposed to, or took too many of them to sleep. I mean, I don't know, obviously, but no, you know, she was a victim, but, you know, and
Failsafe happened shortly thereafter. I mean, right? I mean, it was
yeah, Failsafe was what,
64?
61?
64?
Was it that late?
Yeah,
64?
well, it was released in 64. Yeah. So it was post Merlin.
Yeah, well, Sid, that's, you know, I thought Sidney did. All his experience in shooting tight in television did him. The picture, what's I find interesting is that it still gets played in colleges or stuff. It still works. It pays off. It's a very good melodrama in that sense. You know, it's disturbing. It's very well acted. Larry Hagman is extremely good.
He's the translator. He's the Russian interpreter.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And Fonda is, you know, that very rare actor who can work in this much space. And
it was an interesting cast. I mean, you had Mathau as sort of the Herman Kahn.
That's right.
character.
Exactly. Yeah. And Dan O'Hurley.
He was wonderful.
But did you see it when it was done again?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. But first, one of the things that struck me about it was that it came out the same year as Dr. Strangelove.
Well, that screwed us because we were due to come out before them, and Kubrick instituted, or was about to institute, some phony lawsuit saying that Failsafe stole from the book or story that
Red Alert.
Red Alert or something.
Which was
like
a serious book. That's why it was so interesting. If they made this comedy from what was a book that was as serious as Failsafe.
And so, you know, Columbia settled the suit with him by holding us back and letting them. And it's too bad because you can do a satire after you've seen the thing it's satirizing. But it's hard to, if you have the satire and then the serious thing, it doesn't quite work.
That's interesting.
Really. And so we didn't do much business, I don't think. But, you know, again, it keeps paid. And then, you know, I got a call from Clooney about they were going to do it. And there was some just minor things in the script that had to be changed because I forget what, Columbia owned the rights to the script but not to the book, something like that. So I couldn't use stuff that was particular to the script, but I could use stuff from the book, which most of it was anyway.
But any original dialogue you had written for the first movie.
But, you know, the way around, there's one scene in which the wife of the pilot gets on the phone and says, come back, it's not true, it's come back, not true. And I couldn't use that because that had been original for me in the script. So I made it his son and wrote essentially the same scene, you know. But Clooney was it, because he said, listen, I said to him when he said they're doing it again, I said, one of the things about that movie is that once it goes, it goes. You can't stop it or throw a commercial in and they'd have to rev up again and do it. And he said, they've promised me one commercial at the beginning, one commercial at the end, and that's it, you know. Then over the next weeks or months, it was, well, we're just going to have one in the middle, you know. And then it ended up with, I don't know, 4 or 5 commercials.
But the thing is, he did it live.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It was, you know, with a very good cast.
Yeah, terrific cast. But I always wonder when he, you know, he did that and they did the ER episode live, and it always makes me wonder whether it really works, because then it seems like more of a stunt. When you guys were doing it live,
Yeah, we had
you
to
had
do
to.
it. We had to. Yeah, it is a stunt to do it live. There's no, you know, I don't think whatever you might get in spontaneity, there's no reason to anymore, you know, to do it live. You had a great cast, and Stephen Frears. I sat with him, with Frears, at the rehearsal, wasn't just rehearsal, and he was just, you know, befuddled. But the whole thing was, of course, the technical director was doing everything. At 18 cameras, he was doing this, doing that, and Frears just kind of threw up his hands and said, "Never again. I'm not going to." You know, he did. There was no real directing that he did.
I can't. Yeah, I'd forgotten that it was Stephen Frears.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine him directing.
No,
that.
it was, you know,
he's such a great director, but not in that venue.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the front, because actually you wound up doing 2 films that really reflected back on that era, on the Blacklist and so forth. And I'm thinking The House on Carroll Street being the second.
Oh yeah.
The second one, but the front being the one that I think.
Well, the front was Martin Ritt, the director, who was a close friend, had been blacklisted. And when we were both cleared and able to work again, we wanted to do what would be essentially a story of our experience. That is, tell a direct, dramatic story of somebody who's communist, who's blacklisted, why he's what he is, and what did he do like that. Couldn't get anybody interested. You know, no studio or anything. Nobody would, and we talk about it periodically. And then we talked about it again one time when we were playing tennis, I remember. And I got the idea of going at it sideways. That is, telling the story of a front, really. And Marty liked that idea. And then, you know, I felt it had to be told as a comedy, essentially. And I ran into a lot of resistance from Marty that way, who somehow feel that to do something as a comedy was to trivialize it, you know. And he wouldn't accept the fact that Shaw and Moliere and some other comic writers were also serious. But anyway, you know, I did some work on that idea, and we took it to a man who had been our agent at one point, named David Beagleman.
Of fame and story.
He was a fascinating man because he was a very successful agent, and I don't know how to describe him. He was extreme. Marty and I were in London, and we wanted to go to the movies, and it was a Buñuel movie. Belle de Jour was playing, I remember, and we were going with Beagleman also. He was there as an agent, and we're standing in line. It was a big line around the block, and we got at the end of the line, and we're standing there, and all of a sudden we see Beagleman running toward us with somebody from the theater there, he rushes up to me. He says, Monsieur Buñuel, we've been looking all over for you. What are you doing here? Come on in. You know, and he said, say something in French. Say something. He rushed in, sat us in a box or something like that. He exulted in that kind of thing. On the other hand, he was something of a crook, really, you know, and he bounced checks or forged checks and stuff like that. I don't think he ended up in jail, but he committed suicide,
right,
is what he did. Anyway, at that point, he was the head of Columbia. We came to him with our idea, and he was sufficiently interested in it to put up some money for me to write a first draft script. I did, and we brought that to him, and he read it, and he said, yes, I like it, but I'll only do it if you get a star. And by a star, he meant Redford or Newman or Warren Beatty or nobody we wanted, you know. And so we were stuck. I mean, we couldn't think of anybody. And then I remember again when we were playing tennis, Marty stopped and said, what about that kid? And I said, what kid? He said, you know, that funny kid. That kid is funny. I said, Mel Brooks? No, I'm funny. It was Woody. I thought that was a great idea. And we sent the script to him, and he liked it. He agreed to do it. And that made it possible. We brought it back to Beagleman, and we made the movie, you know. And Woody was great, you know. He came to us, you know, and he said, this is your movie. I'm here to act. You know, anything you want me to do, I'll do. You know, and he wasn't interested in writing or rewriting, anything like that. He made one suggestion, which I think was a good suggestion, because in a very early script, I had given the character a mother, a Jewish mother. And what he said, no, he said it's too, I forget the words he used, but what he meant was it was too trite. He had done that before, the Jewish mother thing, and, you know. So we cut it out, and he was right about that, you know. But otherwise, the only other thing he did, the final scene of the movie takes place at he's being called before this committee, the subcommittee, who are interrogating him, and he's trying to tap dance his way around it. And we filmed it, we showed it, and I don't know, I thought maybe it could be funnier, or it wasn't enough. And Woody said, well, let's shoot it again and let me improvise. So he said, great. So we set it up again. We hadn't struck the set, and he did about 10 minutes. It was hilarious. You know, everybody was falling out. It was just so, it was Woody at his best, and it ruined the scene. It really, you know, it stopped. The movie stopped, and there was 10 minutes of Woody Allen, and we couldn't use it. But he had a riff about stealing Girl Scout cookies or something. He was just wonderful. He was a gent. He was really, you know, a good guy. And we did our movie, you know, and Marty hired as many ex-blacklisted actors as, you know, for different parts. It got the reception at Woody's movies did at that time. It did well.
Because this was Annie Hall, and this was around that time.
Annie Hall came later, yeah. Came afterward. But it was, you know, he was doing Love and Death and Sleepers, and did good business in the cities and not so good business outside the cities. The reviews were mixed. There was a certain amount of red baiting of Marty and me.
Really?
Yeah.
Even then?
Yeah. David Denby, as a matter of fact.
David Denby?
Who was writing for a Boston alternate paper.
Oh, the Phoenix.
It's the Phoenix or something like
Boston
that.
After Dark.
Took out after by Marty and me.
Wow.
I forget, except, I mean, those are the reviews you remember, the bad ones.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
but I don't remember exactly what he said, except it was not nice.
Mm-hmm. And you had Zero Mostel.
Zero was in it.
Extraordinary.
And, Zero was great. He was really wonderful. And there's a sequence in the film in which the character Zero plays this blacklisted comic who's out of work and is offered a job to perform at a hotel in the Borscht Belt up in the Catskills. And it's a place where he had performed before he was blacklisted for like $2,000 a gig. And they were offering him $500 now, and he had to take it because he was on his ass. And he gets up to the place, and the manager has cut him cut the $500 in half. He was only going to get $250, and he has to take it. He has to take whatever there was. It was based on something that really happened. I drove Zero up to a place called the Concord, where again he had worked for $2,000, and the guy cut him in half, and he had to go on, and it was a big hall, like 1,500 guests there, and he went on and he did his shtick, whatever it was. They loved him, and he was in such a rage. Really, he was cursing them in Yiddish. He was calling them names. The more he did it, the more they left. You know, and he couldn't get off. And I remember he finished. They called him back. He cursed them. We sat down. He polished off most of a bottle of whiskey. I put him to bed, and we drove back the next day. Mm-hmm. And I wanted him to do that. And he wouldn't. He couldn't. Mm-hmm. We gave him, I wrote an angered moment where after he's performed, he's sitting at the bar with some women, and the manager comes by, and he turns on the manager, and the rage comes out there. Mm-hmm. But there was something about him up doing his comic act.
Sir, I'm sorry.
Huh?
No, go ahead.
No, I'm still moved by it.
Well, it's certainly the most intensely autobiographical piece you've ever written.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, The House on Carroll Street wasn't... That was just a melodrama on that theme,
Yeah, set during that period.
Yeah. And that's the one where I thought the director fucked it up. Mm-hmm. So, but the front was, I think that movie and the Molly Maguires were the two films that meant the most to me, mm-hmm. I think.
Molly Maguire is a very tough labor picture.
When the Molly Maguires took place in Pennsylvania in 1876. It was based on a true incident, mm-hmm. where there was a lot of unrest. The miners were moved. The hierarchy then was the miners were at the bottom, then supervising them were the Welsh, and above them were the English, finally. And the conditions were terrible. There were no unions. And there was a terrorist Irish miner group called the Molly Maguires. Nobody really knew why it was the Molly Maguires. Anyway, but they went around blowing up mines and killing mine superintendents. And the owners hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And the Pinkerton sent in a detective named McParland, who pretended to be a miner or something, joined the Molly Maguires, worked with them. At the end, turned them in. I think 20 of them were hanged, something like that. That was the basic thing. And I wrote it with the main relationship between McParland, played by Richard Harris, and the head of the miners, Sean Connery. And I like the movie. It's very tough. It's a very hard movie because in the end, he turns them in, and they hang. And he goes off to a better job for the Pinkertons in Denver, I believe it was.
So it winds up at Ludlow, probably.
He winds up being put on the stand by Clarence Darrow, really. Anyway, I produced the movie also with Marty, and it was a very happy experience, And again, we did our movie, whether like it or not, and I cannot see that movie being done. I think it cost $10 million or something. We shipped real coal from Pennsylvania to Hollywood for the mine thing. But it got a bad break at Paramount because Paramount had like 4 or 5 films around that price that were not successful. On a clear day, you could see tomorrow, Paint Your Wagon, a Harold Robbins novel thing that were not doing well, and our thing, and they just dumped them. They took the loss rather. I think our picture, I don't know, might have found an audience if it had been allowed to stay in a smaller theater and build on word of mouth. I directed a thing for HBO, a half-hour show, must have been about 10 years ago or something like that. And I remember being pleased with it. Matt Dillon and Kira Sedgwick were in it, and Jerry Stiller, and it worked well. It got a good reception, and I liked doing it. I looked at it again recently, and it just seemed like lead. I mean, the pace seemed so slow compared now to how quick cuts are when you do it. I teach at NYU graduate school, and I'm an adjunct, and I just teach one class, which is what they call a thesis class. And what it is simply that they have to write a full-length script in the year that we have them. And there are a lot of books now about screenwriting, McKee and the rest of those people. But basically, I teach 3 things to them that I tell them that, which is character, conflict, and meaning. Who are these people? What are they doing? What do they want? What's keeping them from getting it? And fundamentally, what does it mean? Because you can have great automobile chases and special effects and stuff like that. But what are you saying? There's a great story, possibly apocryphal, but I hope not, about Thoreau living out at Walden Pond when they did the first wireless transmission. I think went from Boston to Portland or something like that. And some friend of Thoreau's ran out to him at Walden to tell him about this great discovery. They're sending this message from one place to the other without whatever it is. And Thoreau just said, but what did it say? And that's a hard question to deal with, and I find with the students, because they don't think of that they're saying, they don't think that they're saying something. They're producing an effect, really. And most of the time it's something they think they or hope they can sell to Hollywood. But when you say to them, well, what does this all mean, really? Then you get into the good stuff, really.
Can you teach that? Can you?
I don't think you can teach it, but you can bring it up as a subject. You could have them, or try to have them deal with it and face it. What are you saying? You know, why are you saying it? What does it mean to you, really? Most of the time, they don't have an answer for it. What is interesting and a bit, well, I don't know, depressing or not, is that I very rarely get a script from them that's personal, really. That's really about them in some way. They'll, you know, they'll do all kinds of other subjects. They do science fiction. They'll do melodrama. You know, but not very much that's personal. You know, I think they're scared of it. They're scared of being personal. They're scared of going down where they would have to go down to do it. I remember very early on, years ago, I taught a class, and for another class, they had to do a 5-minute film themselves on any subject they wanted. And then they brought the finished product into my class, and we all looked at them, really. Most of them were very well done technically, extremely knowledgeable technically. They knew how to move the camera. I think that they were given a subject matter of it being personal in some way. And what was interesting in that, almost all of them, they figured in their piece either as victim or observer, really. Never as the protagonist of their own life.
No hero.
Do
you still work the same way? I mean, when you sit down to work on a script, do you still work?
Yeah, I still work inefficiently, slothfully. I'm a little more tolerant of myself than I used to be, because I would feel guilty and ashamed of my bad habits, you know, and I should be more disciplined and all the rest of that. But I don't feel that. What I know is that if I keep a relation to the work, it'll get done. That's the important thing. If for some reason I go away for 3 days or a week or whatever and not work and come back, it's difficult for me. I need, however minimal, a relation to the thing every day, if I can, you know. And it doesn't have to be much. It just has to be something. And I'm a big believer in that Hemingway dictum of quit while you're ahead, really, during the day. Stop while you're still going well. And because I find that then you can pick it up more easily because you have something going there. Whereas if what I used to do, I'd work until I had finished a scene or something like that. Then when I'd come back next day, I'd have to move that mountain again, you know, again. But basically, I work the same way. I prowl around the room a lot, and it gets done. It gets done, you know.
The technology has changed, but the habits haven't.
The habits haven't changed. I mean, it took me a long time to move from the typewriter to the computer. I was convinced I couldn't make it work. I mean, the typewriter, the sound of a typewriter was, you know, but it works very nicely, you know, and you know, and then I've written 2 books. I seem to write a book every 50 years.
Whether it needs writing or not.
So, you know, I like writing prose. I'd like to write more of it. There was a period a few years ago when I was writing a lot of book reviews for the LA Times, but then the editor left, and they
Book review business has just gone
terrible
south.
Yeah. It was interesting writing prose again when I wrote this last book, because after all the years of minimalizing writing a screenplay, I would write 4 or 5 pages and bring it to Gloria, my wife, who's a wonderful judge of writing. And she'd say, they're fine, but it should be 10 pages. Really. The hardest job was putting more texture into it, really. And because I was just used to, you know, writing, or somebody said about, I forget about screenwriting or playwriting, it was like putting a 7-foot man in a shoebox. You know, but I
There's that great, you know, was it John le Carré said for a long time, he said he never got involved in the movies of his books because you don't like to see your ox turned into a bullion cube.
It's true. But I like what Faulkner did when somebody complained to him about some book of his that had been made into a movie. They said it was so terrible. You know, they fucked up your book, and he said, no, they didn't. I mean, the book is there. Nobody has touched the book. He said, that's what's important, really. I don't know whether I really know what makes a good script. You know, it's telling the story. It's being interested in the characters. I am basically a word person. I grew up that way. I mean, I started that way. So I don't think in terms of images that much. I've had to learn movies, really. I mean, these students I teach, for example, know much more technically than I do, you know, about, sometimes you know, they talk among themselves. It's like a foreign language to me. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I am most at home, or feel most at home, writing about 2 characters in a room. Really, I like, you know, I always have to think of how can I make this scene more interesting? You know, how can I make it visually more interesting? You know, I think a lot about Bergman, you know, who can put 2 women in a little railway, you know, compartment, you know, and not go off their faces, and you're mesmerized. Because you know, for me, it always comes back to content. You know, the tradition that I grew up in believed in the primacy of content, basically. But, you know, what he was saying. And so when as far as historical material, I think one of the big things is emancipating yourself from the facts, basically, and yet keeping what you're doing true to what happened. That's the hardest part. But I work basically from a 3-act structure, which again comes out of playwriting, mainly, you know. 1st act climax, 2nd act climax, 3rd act resolution, you know. I find the process very dialectical, really. It's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and moving on. I have friends who are helpful screenwriters, you know, younger than I am. Went to film school, went to things, and I will occasionally show them, say, the first draft of a script I've done, you know. And very often what will come back is get them out of the room, really, you know, get them out of the room, because that's my tendency. That's what I would fight against. But it still is what's being done in that room is what's important.
How have your relations been with agents over the years?
I fault myself very strongly because I chose agents on the basis of I like them, you know. I like to go out with them. I like to talk to them and something like that. And they would take, you know, it never really worked terribly well. I mean, my book agents, when I first started, Leland Haywood was my agent, but for movies, when I finally ended up with a killer agent, Irving Lazar was my agent for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But he paid no attention to me at all. He took me on because of my friend Erwin Shaw, and so Sam Cohn was my agent, and we played tennis together and share confidences together, but he was terrible for me. I've had this relationship with HBO, which has been very good, and I've done a lot of stuff for them. But then the person I knew there was the head of drama, Colin Callender, has left.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much longer I'll be there. I'm doing a BBC series, possibly with an Irish writer named Ronan Bennett, actually, a very good writer. And it's a mini-series, and apparently they're going ahead with it, so that's great.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Now we have to write it.
But with the clarity of hindsight, what would you tell somebody up and coming about getting an agent, or is there any advice?
I would just say don't be fooled by how nice they are, really, or how nice it is to have a drink with them, you know. That, you know, and the fact that basically they work for the producers. They have to stay in business, you know. So if it's ever a choice between the producer and you, that's who they'll choose. I mean, maybe there are a few who won't, but
we saw that during the strike.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's the best you ever worked with in terms of acting?
In terms of acting?
Yeah.
I'd say Fonda. He could play fail-safe. He could play Once Upon a Time in the West. Remember, he plays this despicable villain. That's, you know, certain actors, they're a pleasure to watch. You know.
Fonda had such an intensity that was sort of leavened by that Nebraska upbringing, I think. But he was so incredibly intense.
He was very intense and very complicated. You know, a very complex guy, hard to reach.
Is there a moment that you consider the moment at which, we were talking with Goldman yesterday, he talks often about how the cliff scene in Butch Cassidy was sort of the thing that defined his career from then on. Was there a moment like that for you in your career?
It's funny, when the thing that comes to mind is something during the Blacklist, where I did an adaptation of a Thornton Wilder book now called The Bridge of San Luis Rey, with a wonderful cast, I think directed by Bobby Mulligan. But I remember going to a rehearsal where I had to be smuggled in the back door and put in a room where I could open the door a little bit and see what's going on, but not that. And the woman who was going to get the credit for it had nothing to do with me. I think she was David Suskind's mistress or one of his girlfriends or something. But she was kind of parading around at the rehearsal and taking compliments from everybody and enjoying it. And there was something about it. I was watching it, with a funny kind of detachment, really, and a feeling of this isn't affecting me, that I'm who I am. I wrote this, and it's good. And because of circumstances, somebody else's name may go on it, or it doesn't happen. But I've done this, and it's mine, you know. And whether I get the recognition for it or not is too bad, but is not the essential thing. And that basically determines what's important to me, and has determined what's important to me. And I would, if I were giving advice, you know, to young screenwriters who are starting, it's in relation to something like that, is you must know who you are. You will be tested. If you go to Hollywood, they are always asking one question, which is, how far can we push you? What is your bottom line? How much will you compromise? And what will you compromise? And if you're not clear about that, if you lose that, then you've lost yourself, basically. Along with that, you need, I think the two things that you need, almost more than anything, is resilience and a sense of humor, which are very, very important. You're in a business which is really based on rejection and the anticipation of rejection. And you have to know how to deal with that. But you have to know who you are, you know. At the end of the day, you have to be able to say, yes, I want this. I want everything that comes with it. I want it all. But there is a point at which I'll say no. That really, more than anything, will determine who you are and what your life is going to be like.
You really experienced that in a very intense crucible.
Yeah, I could do without it, but I wasn't blacklisted by accident. I was blacklisted for something I did that I believed in and would do again, mostly. But that's what you have to know, really, about yourself, I think.